people are always, they're afraid of the unknown, right? And death is the great unknown, but it's also the great equalizer. Like, so to bring it back to Sikhism for a second, it's like death is the highest form of equality, because that's the one thing that is going to happen to all of us.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. To many, talking about death can sound scary and upsetting, but there's so much more to it. And yes, there are times when talking about death can bring up all of those, and so should it. Because as in life, death can also be painful and difficult. But there are also times when it can be empowering, joyful, and bring meaning and purpose. And my guest today joined me for a conversation that held all of these, testament to his curiosity and openness to just sit and chat about death. Daman Bamrah is hilarious. He's a British Sikh comedian who brings so much heart into everything that he does. He's been called the next big thing by Rolling Stone, who also said he is defiantly and proudly himself. And he's appeared on our screens on Channel 4, BBC One and BBC Three, plus shared the stage with Munya Chawawa, Mo Gilligan and other comedy heavyweights. So, Daman, welcome to the show. Today, we are going to be having what I call a dead conversation. So let's dive straight in. Let's talk about death. Such a big topic. And I suppose where I want to flow to first is just your connection with death in your life. Like, does it come up a lot? Do you think about it? Do you speak about it? What experiences you've had with it and what it brings up?
Yeah. I would say that in terms of death, does it come up a lot? I don't think it comes up a lot necessarily, but I have this thing, I'm sure other people have it too, where I just have sort of periods of time where I'm like really worried about death. But weirdly enough, not my own death, but more death of my loved ones. I think now that I've hit 30 a year ago, I basically, I'm starting to notice my parents get older. I think, you know, in the first maybe 10, 20 years of your life, you're like, oh yeah, this is my mum and dad, or my mum and dad, they don't change. And then you start to see people get grey, and you start to see ailments come in and all of these things. And it's a big reminder of mortality. So I think that's the bit of death that I'm worried about the most. And so what it does is it just forces me to go for a walk with dad more, or like make mum do yoga with me in the morning or something. They'll listen to this and they'll be like, you're lying, you're the laziest person in our house. But still, I'm going to claim it. I'm going to claim it. I think that's the bit of death that worries me the most. But in terms of experiences with death, I've had, I would say, two sort of major instances where I've experienced it. Number one, basically two of my grandparents, my dad's dad and my mum's mum. So that was the first experience I had, was my grandfather dying in 2008. So I would have been roughly 16, 17. And yeah, it was very, it was interesting because I walked into the house because, you know, he hadn't been picking up the phone for ages. So we walked in and yeah, he was sort of lying there on the sofa sort of. And, you know, so that was like a stark experience for me. That's the first time I've seen somebody, you know, dead in real life. And, you know, my mum and dad walked in behind me, and my dad, you know, ran to him to see if he could like resuscitate him. My mum, you know, she immediately broke down in tears. And I was just sort of like processing, but I didn't like necessarily, like my expression didn't really even change. And like, you know, a few minutes later, we were sat in the kitchen. My mum was like, it's okay. You can cry. Like, you feel it, And I was like, I'm okay. Like, I'm not trying to be strong or anything. Like, I'm just okay. And then the funeral came round, a couple of days later, and that's when it just really, really hit me. And it all came out. It comes from this place. That sort of grief comes from a place that you can't. It's hard to access. I think it's such a deep emotion. It's such a heavy emotion. It's not just on the surface. So I think people will react differently to it. For me, that's how it came out, and that's when it came out. But it was a sort of. Yeah, it was a very, very sad experience. My granddad and I were close, but it also teaches you that life has to go on. I think the first time you go through that experience. So then when my grandmother died a couple of years later, again, it's very, very sad, but maybe because I'd been through it once before, I was a little bit more mentally prepared for what was coming. And I think the big thing in that second experience when my grandmother died was she was in India and we were here. And so what happens is in Sikhism, we burn the body, right? We cremate the body. But in this country, you go to a crematorium. So what happens is you have a coffin, your loved one goes in the coffin, and then they go through the crematorium, and then you receive the ashes. Whereas in India, like your loved one will be dressed up, put on like a bed of wood, and you will set fire to the bed of wood yourself. So you will watch them burn, and that is very, very difficult, because I think there's something about humans that is so attached to the physical form, right? You almost think that if they're still here, I still have some sort of connection to them, and so therefore, if I now cremate them, if I burn the body, then what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong here? Like, then, because they're going to be truly gone, and it's going to be my fault, even though like all of this doesn't make sense because they're already passed away. But because we're so attached, like, you have that thought, and it's so difficult to watch your loved one turn to ash in front of your eyes. And for me, obviously it was terrible, but like I can't imagine the pain my mum, my uncles, and my auntie were going through. So that was a very, very stark lesson I learned there as well, which was that you have to let go of the physical form. You just do, because that's not who we are. We're not our bodies, are we? We're our souls. So that's what it is. I don't know. In my opinion, anyway. Disclaimer: it's my opinion. But yeah, so there was a lot learned over those experiences, but they happened in my sort of mid to late teens, and I think I've done a lot of emotional development after that point. So I think whatever the next one is, that'll be even rougher. That's the thing about death. But it's okay. It's life. It's all one and the same.
Exactly. It's all one and the same. And I think there's something really interesting in there, as you shared, our connection to that physical body. And I'd be interested as well, because obviously you mentioned that, that difference between sort of the cremation here in the UK versus in India. And I'd be really interested as well to just get your thoughts on, is that, because my mum's Hindu, so obviously there's a lot of sort of similarities by way of that cremation, that letting go of the physical body so the soul can go on and into that sort of next incarnation. Is it the same in Sikhism? That sort of belief of reincarnation into that next soul and karma and stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to my understanding, for sure. I'm always I will again. I'll say, I'm not the best Sikh in the world, but I'm certainly someone who's trying. So, fact check me, whoever's listening to this. But to my understanding, yes, the onus is on you, the listener. I accept responsibility for nothing. In Sikhism,
Same for me with the Hindu side, because I'm not a Hindu either.
We're just a couple of kids who are trying our best. So essentially in Sikhism, we believe that, the body is a vessel for a soul. So when you die, you get cremated so that your soul can most easily detach from the body and move on to its next life form, because we believe in reincarnation. So we believe in something called Jurasi Lakh June, which roughly translates to 8.4 million life forms basically on this planet. So essentially, you have to go through that many life forms to achieve your human life form, and your human life form is the best chance you have of filling your spiritual cup, so to speak, right? And so it's your best chance of being able to understand spirituality and connect with it the most. So it comes after a long, long time. And so this is your best chance of making the most of it and tuning into divine frequency and God's will and such. So that's essentially what we believe. So, when it comes to funerals as well, we're trying to say, don't grieve too much, don't mourn too much, because death is just a part of life. It's God's will, and it's not inherently sad because, like I say, it's not you dying. It's simply your form before you move on to the next one. So yeah, and that's interesting as well, because it ties into culture. Back in the day, in the villages, you would see people that would, they were almost hired to come and cry at people's funerals, right? Which is also, to my understanding, like a very old tradition anyway. I know I've read about the ancient Egyptians doing a similar thing. So it's interesting because we as humans are so it's almost like a pride thing, right? Like your wedding has to be the biggest wedding. And then so when you cry, most people have to cry at your funeral. Like it becomes an ego thing and a pride thing, And so I don't know if that happens so much anymore, but certainly in Sikhism, they don't want you to mourn too much, because it's not seen as the saddest thing in the world. It's just simply, it's so much more complex than the end of your journey here, which is just what I think the focus is on, and rightly so, I guess. But that's what Sikhism teaches, to my knowledge.
Really interesting, and I think it's beautiful as well, because it's that, the new beginnings is a continuation, isn't it? And actually, I think that there's something really interesting in that sort of the culture. I guess in some ways it's culture clashes, isn't it? And the fact that actually where we've got these real anchors, and I'm assuming, for me, I think I often think, UK, predominantly Christian country, like my family, my dad's side Christian, and I often connect in and I sort of almost blame that sort of, I guess, the UK, and therefore I think Christianity, for not kind of, I suppose, treating death, with that connection and sort of pushing it into the shadows. And actually it's probably his culture. I'm sure there's loads of stuff in all of the religions that have those real anchors to that moment and brings meaning into it, whatever the religious beliefs are. And actually, I think there's something in, I know you grew up in Wembley, like me, Woking. So, growing up in Wembley and Woking, and sort of how, even with our religions, and how then, that, for example, going to a crematorium, and I suppose it being much more behind closed doors, does create that distance. Or, when I think about in Hinduism, it was always the tradition to die at home. And obviously now with hospitals, there's many, many people who die behind closed hospital doors, or in hospices or care homes or wherever it is. And actually that's just pushed death into the shadows versus, having it right here and having I suppose, whole communities witnessing, not just when people in your family die, but anyone in your neighborhood when they die, that ritual, which I wonder if, it makes it sort of, I suppose, less shocking, which was my own experience as well. Even in the UK, I remember, I've been to a couple of Hindu funerals, and for me, just having the open casket was like, oh, like I just in my sort of younger self, I couldn't fathom it. I was like, yeah, this is shocking. Oh my goodness. Like how, and as well, I think, when I look at, for example, like relatives that I've seen who are sort of thrown into those situations, you mentioned, obviously it would have been really hard for your mum with your grandmother and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really interesting how culture has kind of pushed death into the shadows. And I wonder, I don't know, I don't know if you've got any theories on the why, but do you have any thoughts about why in general we like to kind of, I suppose, sanitize death or sort of push it away and not really speak to it or be with it?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think death is like, I think we grow up in a space where, we're afraid of death. And I think that's perfectly understandable, because death is, I think, seen as the end of the journey, right? Like the end of the road, that's it. And particularly if you grow up within either a space of like thoughts within atheism, and like no disrespect absolutely to any other cultures at all. I'm just trying to rationalize why I think maybe we might be a bit more scared of death, because if we're saying that there's no spiritual continuation, we're saying that once we die, we are dust, and some people are okay with that, and some people are not okay with that, and I think it contributes to fear, because people are they're afraid of the unknown, right? And death is the great unknown, but it's also the great equalizer. Like, so to bring it back to Sikhism for a second, it's like death is the highest form of equality, because that's the one thing that is going to happen to all of us, right? Like, and you're not going to take anything with you, not even your body. You're going to take nothing with you. It doesn't matter who you are in this lifetime. I think it almost ties into this concept of the American dream. The American dream is like, yeah, come to America, get rich, accrue wealth, accrue power. And so then death is the loss of everything that you've existed for. So it's taking away the power of the purpose that we're allegedly supposed to be following. It feels like that. It feels like that's what we're taught to chase. And so now that we can't chase that anymore, we have to escape it. And that's why so many, again, it's capitalism. Like, there's so much technology out there that's trying to cheat death. How do I prolong my life to the highest level? How do I take my consciousness and put it into a different vessel? How do I do all of those things? Because it's like fundamentally you're trying to outrun it, but you can't. So I think it just it ties in with everything that society, larger society, wider society is trying to achieve. So we're surrounded by those kind of ideas a lot. And also, I think theistically as well, where the concept of heaven and hell comes up a lot as well. So perhaps also people are afraid that they're not doing well enough to get into heaven, and then now they're afraid of death because they don't want to go to hell. And so I think, I don't know, for me, those would be my theories on why perhaps we're so afraid of death, to go to a realm where we might be punished or we might not exist. I don't know what's worse. So that's the thing that's sort of instilling fear in people's hearts, would be my theory on it. I don't know. What's yours?
Oh, I think that's really, really interesting. I really connected into that because I'm really conscious. So for me, with my theories on this, I think about it, as you can imagine, with this podcast, I think about it a lot. I
Yeah.
definitely think that there's something in the sort of capitalist world that we live in, and to your point, that sort of severing from from nature. I think it went all the way back. If I think about, like, I mean, going back to like Roman times and the destructions of like the forests, and our disconnection from nature, and from that
Yeah.
being the very essence and the very roots of everything, including death. You know, if you look at the seasons, you've got spring and summer. And if I think about how we live, like, I mean, we both worked in corporate, both worked in agency land. And I think about in corporates, you're permanently trying to live in summer. You're permanently trying to grow, trying to increase, without that
Yeah.
understanding that actually everything has a period of dying and death. Everything will inevitably come to an end. But actually, I look at these big corporations who are just assuming, again, they're going to be here forever. Or, you know, you look at anti-aging products as they're sort of marketed, or you look at the world of Hollywood and, you know, all those
Yeah.
red carpets, and how many people are just trying to defy the fact that actually, and it always look for me, I'm like, when you go too far in that space, I'm like, you would just look better aging gracefully, you know. Like, there's something really beautiful, I think, around that, like the autumn
Oh
period
yeah.
of our lives. And I think about how, you know, we kind of come back into sort of the roots of culture. I think, and again, this is my theory. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not I don't know, an academic who studied this, but I do think that there's been a severance from basically the natural order of things, and that has taken us to this point where all aspects of dying and death are therefore pushed into the shadows. As a woman, it's, you know, if you look at sort of the, I suppose, again, that anti-aging perspective, and even how the sort of
uh,
wise women, and I know things are getting better, but how the wise women were so sort of suppressed and again pushed into the shadows. And I just think that's all a reflection of our sort of, you know, disconnection from nature's seasons, and from that kind of autumn and then winter. I do know it's getting better. I've been sort of very much cheering on Hollywood and sort of the entertainment space as it is righted all of those wrongs. But, you know, I think also the other thing for me is around us not being willing to be connected into uncomfortable things. So I think that's the other thing, is our kind of easeful lives where there isn't too many challenges, or, you know, we're not facing death every day in our community. I think that, you know, in hospitalizations and death being pushed into hospitals, into hospices, you know, and kind of kept at arm's distance as well, I think that there's something in us just sort of not, it's almost our comfort zone has retracted in. We're not comfortable being uncomfortable in, as you shared, when people die, you know, it is painful, it's really sad, and it's not going to be, you know, fun, obviously. But there's such, I think that's such a fear in our society for, as you shared, for that happening, and for kind of how will we be through it, and almost feels like the world's going to end, versus actually being like, we will be okay, because as you shared earlier, there is life on the other side.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's about us finding our peace within it over here. I think there's no point being so terrified of it, because, you know, like we know, it's like the only inevitability of life is death. So why be so terrified all the time of the inevitable, and why not find, you know, peace and coping mechanisms and, you know, philosophy within that? Like, it would make things better. But I think also it's easy for me to say that as, you know, as somebody who's like touch wood relatively healthy and, you know, all of that sort of thing. I think it's you come face to face with it a lot more, like if you're somebody who might be facing an ailment of some sort, or maybe even with age, you know, maybe you're coming, of course you're coming closer to it. But the one thing I always wonder is, you know, how does life experience tie in with death? Because I think being afraid of death is something, younger people have a lot more of that, and B, I think that maybe people who are more sort of like, you know, like I said before, like more like tuned into the capitalistic rituals of society, they're more attached to this idea of immortality. Whereas a lot of the time, if you speak to older people who have lost most of their family, most of their friends, everything aches and pains. They're not out and about anymore, really. You know, they're like functioning, but are they living? You know, it's you talk to them, and they're like, you know, a friend of mine told me she used to work in a hospital, and sometimes she would work with very, very old people. And there was one lady who had like a heart attack. She must have been late 80s, early 90s, and they saved her. And she was a bit like, "Why did you save me? Like, I'm done. Like, it's okay. Let me go." You know, I'm ready because I've done everything I set out to do. So there's a real like, which is something I think is hard for us to hear in a way. What do you mean you're done? But you can also understand it completely from that perspective too. Death is sometimes the greatest mercy in particular situations. So, yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's so true. And I think that's where these conversations are so important, because I recently had a Duke University professor, Dan Ariely, on the podcast, and he's doing research into end of life. And he was talking about just that, and how, you know, you can, because there's these different sort of forms that you can fill in, you know, do not resuscitate orders, and sort of expressing your wishes for end of life to say, you know, I don't want to be force fed. I don't want to be resuscitated in these situations. I don't want to be taken to hospital if, for example, I get pneumonia at this stage in life. And he was saying how, you know, that wishes is really hard, because obviously, you know, without that, I suppose the conversations to be able to bring, for example, your kids into acceptance that actually there can be situations where you've got one kid who wants to, I say kid because my mum calls me a kid in my late 30s, where the kids want to, but like the adult children of the person, because obviously you're not going to have kids making these decisions, but where the grown-ups making difficult decisions because they have that power of attorney, where actually, you know, there can be that, what? You know, what? You want to go? What are you talking about? No. And I remember actually, you've got me thinking about when my two grandparents, I remember they bought that's my dad's parents, their sort of British side, and they bought their burial plots. And I remember them telling us really proudly, they were like, "Oh yeah, we bought our burial plots and we're going to be buried, you know, next to each other. And isn't it, it's going to be lovely." And da 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 da. And we were all like, "No, you know, you're not going to die anytime soon. No, what are you talking about?" And now I think about that conversation, actually, I was like, that was a wonderful invitation to actually talk about their perspectives and understand, are you scared of death? What's coming up for you, you know, as you're going through all of this, and really learn and understand and meet them where they are. Because I could imagine when you're that time of life, if no one wants to talk about it and shuts you down, it's got to be quite isolating. You feel like, I don't know who the hell I can talk to about this, about the fact that actually I'm ready to go. I'm pretty much done, or, you know, I'm reconciled that when my time comes, whether it's 10 years or 5 years or 2 years, that's all good. So I could imagine it'd be quite lonely, where you're like, okay, no one wants to talk to me about this.
Yeah. Everyone's too afraid. It's an interesting one, because it's such a life stage thing as well. They would have been like, yeah, you know, I've got to start thinking about this. And you're like, what do you mean? People don't die. Like, especially not you guys. And they're like, okay, all right then. Just, why don't you carry on watching Cartoon Network, mate? And so...
It's like actual kids.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, it's something, I mean, have you ever had the opportunity to talk to sort of like your older family members in recent years now about death and the concept of death? How's that? Have you managed to scratch that itch?
Do you know what? I haven't, because, and I definitely want to. I find it, it's something that I'm sort of working up to. Because for my parents, and I think actually for both of them, they are, I think death's always been, in my family, death has always been something that's been very much pushed into the shadows. I see myself as like, not just the only one who's changing the conversation, but sort of like one of the ones who is. And it's like, you know, I love my parents, but, you know, for example, with my dad, you know, it's sort of like, it's almost like you can feel it's almost like he starts malfunctioning when you talk. It's just that avoidance. It's literally like, how can I kind of get out of this conversation, and just like, okay, like, and it's like Roadrunner, then it's like disappeared either in body or like in mind or whatever it is. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that I'm definitely gearing up to, because I am to kind of, as you shared at the start of your at the start of our conversation, I am really conscious of the fact that obviously, you know, they are getting older. And I think you're right. You know, for me, it was that point of getting into my 30s and suddenly I was like, oh, everyone, my grandparents who are still here and my parents, everybody, I can now connect into that aging process in a way that I hadn't done before. So I'm
Yeah.
really conscious that, yeah, it's really, really important. And actually, you know, even from the perspective of those kind of like the do not resuscitate orders and stuff like that, I know that, you know, that's something where you want to understand and get stuff in place early versus
Yeah.
leaving it. And, you know, seeing with my grandparents where then it was suddenly they were diagnosed with dementia or whatever it is, you know, I don't want to leave it to the point of, I don't know, a diagnosis or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely something on my radar. And how about you? Is it
Yeah.
something that you've ever spoken to your parents about?
Do you know what? Yeah, not so much actually recently. Well, I say recently, not so much ever. But I do want to talk to them more about it because, yeah, just like you brought up again there, it's like, you know, you you turn 30 and then all of a sudden, like, you're understanding mortality a little bit better, maybe because it's clicked in your head, like, oh no, I'm aging too. And it almost feels like that first 20 years of your life is like a free trial. You know what I mean? There you go. Just try whatever you want. Fall down, get up, drink loads, eat rubbish. You're fine. You know, no
Yeah.
consequences. Don't worry about it. And then you hit
Mhm.
30 and then you wake up and everything's like creaky and clicky and you're like, uh-oh. Where's the reset button on this? And so, yeah, I want to talk to my parents about it more. I think like we don't necessarily push it into the shadows, but we've never had, like, I would say, like a long conversation about it. I mean, a lot of the knowledge that I have about death and death within Sikhism as well has come about through conversations with my parents too. So they're they're not super afraid of talking about it. I guess it just doesn't come up that much. It just comes up, you know, when something happens, or like, you know, you see a bit of news. I suppose it's coming up a lot these days because of, you know, recent events in the news. My dad
Yeah.
has always said, when I die, throw a party. I don't want you to be sad. Throw a party. And I always used to think, Dad, come on, it's impossible. That's impossible. You know, how am I going to throw a party, man? Like, but like, you know, and as I've thought about it more over the years, I'm like, you know what? It's actually a really, really nice request. You know,
Mhm.
like, he wants it to be more a celebration of life rather than a mourning in death. And yeah, it's very. I've seen a few, you know, a few of my friends from other backgrounds. They have more of that sort of thing going on anyway, where they will have the funeral, but then also everyone comes back to the house and everyone eats a load of food, and, you know, they want it to be a bit more of a lively atmosphere. And yeah, so that's something Dad's always talked about. I suppose it's something that I've only really like started processing in a deeper way in more recent years. And so, yeah, it's something I want to explore with them more, for sure. But also, just as much as I want to explore that concept of, but how do we get you healthy? Also, you know,
Mm.
it's about yeah, it's about balance. I think in that respect.
And I think that's the wonderful thing, because actually when we start to connect into our, you know, it's true when you're in your 20s or in your teens, you're just like, it's like you're living like you're immortal and everyone's immortal. And actually when you connect in from that perspective to the fact that everything is impermanent, including us, each of us, but actually that can really spotlight, okay, how can we live life well now? So it's kind of like, to your point, I think that's really beautiful to then say, okay, how can we be at our fittest, at our most healthiest? And also, then how can we enjoy life? Like, what are the riches in the now that we need to connect into more? Because, and that's
Yeah,
what I love about sort of talking about death, is because we just, none of us know when when this life is going to end. Like, There is no crystal ball or anything to say, okay, you've got X amount of
Correct.
Monday mornings left, so make sure you're not dreading them. Come on, what you doing, sort of thing. So it's sort of,
Yeah.
it's that perspective of actually, so therefore in today, where am I disconnected? Where am I not honoring myself and my body and being, at my most healthy or whatever it is. So I think that's wonderful as you shared around that balance of sort of like, yes, talking to that, but then also, okay, in the now, how can we really optimize?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also like, you want to optimize it because life is a beautiful gift and you want to make the most of it. But also, what makes life a beautiful gift is also its finite nature. You know what I mean? If it wasn't finite, like you wouldn't, like you would care so much less. Like that's just a human rule. You know what I mean? Like it's like when you play The Sims and you get the cheat code for unlimited money, and it's a really fun hour after that, getting everything you ever wanted. And then guess what? It ruins the game because now, it's done. What am I even playing for anymore? Like, what you realize is that the value is in the trying, the value is in the journey, and the value is in knowing, like, oh no, all of this is limited. So let me make the most of the limited access that I have.
Oh, I love that. You know what you've really got me thinking about is billionaires who've just got that unlimited. And I don't know. I mean, to be honest, they probably got some sort of technology that's going to keep them alive in some like sort of freezer or something.
Like a tank.
But
Yeah, exactly.
actually, where you think about how I don't think there's if I look, I don't know, but I've seen a lot of perspectives around kind of just how miserable it can be when you've got that much, when everything is unlimited, versus to your point saying actually this life is finite. The amounts of sunrises and sunsets that I'm going to get to witness, the amounts of time with my family, all of that is finite. So let's really, really enjoy the now. And and I think also that really links as well into, I'd love as well to speak to your journey too, because when we talk about death in the daily, it's all about all of the ways that death and any endings and transitions in life show up for us. And actually to the point around really seizing this life and making sure that you make it count. I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey, because you have stepped out of corporate into the world of comedy, something that I think
have.
would have taken heaps of courage. So tell me a little bit around that transition and how that was for you.
Oh wow. Well, look, to stick to the theme, to leave a career and to move to another one is daunting in many ways, but it's like it's the death of an identity, and that identity is tied in with so many things. It's your initial plan for life, your parents' expectations of you. You have to reinvent yourself from like a place of inherent, I would say, disrespect, basically, because people are like, "Are you crazy? Like, what are you doing? You have a degree, you have a job, you have a corporate job. What? And you wanna be a clown, huh?" And it's hard because nobody else understands that vision but you. But it's okay. It's okay. You have to. It's only by going through that I guess like I was able to evolve and grow into the more of the person who I wanted to be. And I think you have to just keep doing that in life. You have to keep on dying and experiencing rebirth of your identity, because that's everything that life is giving you is turning you into a different person constantly. So you have to allow that to happen. You mentioned courage. So I had courage to do it, and I thank you for saying that, definitely. But I also I think I inherently would find it tough to not do what I wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like pursuing what I needed to pursue is something that I had to do within my own heart. And in fact, I would say it's even more brave to maybe put that part of you aside and continue down a path where you know that it's more stable. And a lot of the time, that's what people have to do, given their circumstances. I totally understand that. But I think a lot of the time, that's a harder thing to do, is to like ignore what your heart is calling out for and just go down a path rooted in stability, rooted in potentially providing for your family, because maybe that's your priority. I I just had to do it, because if I didn't do it, it would be the death of my dreams. And I just couldn't face that. I had to at least try, you know? So, so comedy is just something I've loved for the longest time. And, I love doing it. And funnily enough, actually, comedy involves a lot of what we refer to as death as well. You know, dying on stage. You go on stage, you tell a joke, doesn't go well. Oh God, I died. You know, we always say that. And the goal is to like try not to die. Because truly, that is the goal of comedy. Yeah, because you have to like come up, you have to present your ideas, and if people don't like it, you're witnessing the death of your idea in real time. You know what I mean? And so you have to like learn how to deal with that. You have to learn to let go and let ideas breathe and give them the space to grow, or put them to the side for the addition of new ideas. And so comedy involves a lot of death. Death and dying, and you did well. Oh, you killed it, man. You murdered that. You murdered that set. You smashed it. So it's it's very connected, all of it.
Oh my goodness, I love that, the interconnections between death culture and comedy. I love that. And actually what I can feel is I love that fear that let's not die on stage. But even in that letting go, because actually in the creative process and in your writing, I'd imagine that there is that process where you have to kind of be like, okay, what do I need to let go? Because actually what that does is it creates, I'd presume, I'm not a comedian. I'm not doing stand up and sort of writing the sets and stuff. But I'd imagine, you need to go through that letting go to be able to create that space. And from that space, again, in that sort of like from winter comes spring. And that is, you left corporate. There's a death of your corporate career. There's the rebirth. You created the space for you to follow your heart. And I love that you said your heart, because that's why I'm like, courage. Yeah. Because I don't know if you know, the root of the word courage is heart. It's basically courage is heart centered. So core in Latin means heart. And then obviously that eventually became cœur in French. But I can imagine actually that there's probably a lot of in that sort of the death of identities, and then sort of moving through, and the death of certain I don't know, like jokes, skits, etc. and stuff. But actually, does that come with? Is there any discomfort that comes with? Like, has there been any moments in this journey where you've been like, oh, this is really uncomfortable to sit with?
Yeah, I mean, regularly. Yeah, I think that is the job. If I'm being honest, like people think comedy is like, they'll go to like a comedy club on a Friday night, they'll see some comics, the comics will have a great set, you guys will laugh, it will be a great time. I mean, look, that is the latest part of this, of the process of comedy, because what had to happen was they had to have an idea, they had to take it to a new material night, they had to really believe in that idea. They say it, nobody laughs. And then they have to go home and be like, am I crazy? Or is this actually still funny? And I'm just not saying it right. Or like there's some sort of external factor. Let me try that again. Let me go through it again. And you go through so many iterations of like changing your jokes, or rewording your jokes, or adding context to the premise. Or, there's like there's so much work, and there's a science to comedy for sure. So you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to accept your failure on stage. And you have to be also willing to not sort of let it ruin the night for you or for the punters, because this is what it is. This is what comedy is. You have to, it's trial by fire every time. There's no way of knowing what's funny until people have laughed at it. So you get more in tune with it over time, but especially at the start, you have to be so willing to die on stage. You have to, because there's no other way to get better, which is why comics talk about, you have to have more stage time, you have to write more, because all of these all of these things are part of the iterative process of just getting better as a comic. Being a comic is so like the opposite of glory. I think it becomes glory at a particular point in somebody's career, but you know, you have to contend with so much failure. It's just being okay with failure and learning how to use failure in your stride to become better. I think that applies to every bit of life, really, isn't it? Like whatever career you're in, like you're going to try things, they're not going to go well, but as long as you learn from it and move forward, like that's fine. That's good. That's what it's supposed to be. It's just that in comedy, it's just happening in front of your eyes. Like it's one of the art forms where, you know, if there's a play, if you're in a play and people don't really like it, like you won't really know until the next day, you know, unless people are groaning and walking out, which like, I mean, yeah, that probably won't happen. You know, I mean, hopefully not anyway, but you know, you might just do, you know, get on with it. And then the next day you read in the paper, okay, this wasn't that great. Oh, right. People didn't really like it. Whereas with comedy, you tell a joke, people don't laugh. Oh, they don't like it. Like, you know, immediately. And then you have to sit there. You have to sit there and move on to the next joke. And you can't sulk. You can't be like, come on, guys, laugh at that. That's definitely funny. Like, it's your responsibility to make them laugh. So if they're not laughing, then that's something you got to work on. And if you're not managing to get them on site, again, it's something you've got to work on. So you have to be so patient and understanding, and like, you have to just keep trying, basically. You have to keep trying, and you have to try in the moment on the job. So that's the beauty of comedy, but that's why it's also, comedy is like forever going to be the unfinished art, because there's always more to do, there's always more to achieve, there's always somewhere to elevate, and it never becomes like super easy. You know what I mean? Like, it's, yeah, I mean, very few people achieve a place in their career where, you know, you just say hi and everyone laughs. I think a couple of people have, maybe Steve Martin, Eddie Murphy, but most people don't experience that.
Yeah, but I also think there's something really interesting in, you know, the lines that can be drawn into all of life, because life is a journey of growth and development, isn't it? That is life until we die. And then, you know, and then if that's your belief, like it is for us, then there's that reincarnation into that next life, and you continue to learn and grow and develop. And I think as well, you know, for me and my journey, and if it helps for anyone who's tuning into this, like, it is difficult, you know, it's uncomfortable, particularly when you do have the death of that former, you mentioned around that identity, and also parts of that. I was in I call it my corporate comfort zone. I was so comfortable, and then there was like the monthly paycheck that was always the same and all of that stuff, and it was really uncomfortable. On the other side, I didn't expect how much my nervous system would take an absolute battering for the first like 18 months of just like, and now it's kind of like, you know, things are more comfortable, as you've shared as well. You get used to being with that discomfort, but that's not to say that discomfort's not there. And I think there's something really powerful, as you shared, around the failures, and where we can just be present in that discomfort to say, oh, this hasn't quite connected in the way that I thought it would. Let me sit with that and let me see what lessons I can take forward, because that's the rebirth. That's the then, okay, I can let go of that, therefore, and then how can I take that forwards into my forwards path? So there's so much that is of such value. But Daman, I'm conscious of time and letting you get on with the rest of your day. And before we close out, I have one question that I ask of all guests, and that is, if you could write a note to your past version of yourself, it might be yourself who's just literally left corporate and is going, oh, this feels uncomfortable. It could be at any time in life. From where you're sitting right now, what words of wisdom would you share with that past version of yourself?
Oh, well, I think it would be really annoying advice for my past self to receive. But if I did have a message, it would just be yourself and just keep going. That's it. Because I think that's it. That's it. It sounds simple, but I think it's difficult. I think it is difficult to try and tap into being your authentic self. And it's a process I'm continually working on. But I think the more you are yourself, the more things will fall in line for you, and just keep going is my way of motivating myself, because, I'm a serial procrastinator who's constantly looking for motivation. And so it's just that idea of, hey, don't worry about it. Just take another step.
Oh, I love that. Be yourself and just keep going. Wisdom that we can all take forwards. And actually, that's what really resonates about you. Every time we catch up, every time I see you, on stage doing your incredible comedy and just all of the other stuff that you are doing in your world, you are just so authentically you. It shines on through. And I think it's true, that's a journey that we can all have, particularly when we're shedding those corporate masks or whatever it is, to just say, yeah, what is taking me into deeper alignment with myself? So thank you for sharing that. And finally, Daman, as well, just share where anyone who's tuning in can connect with you outside of this.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. That was very nice. Where people can connect with me, they can connect with me on TikTok and Instagram at Daman.Bamrah. Twitter is at DSBamrah, although I'm not really on it. Is anyone really still on it? I don't know.
I've deactivated. I'm like, no, I'm out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Jump out of that burning building right now. And I think all my gigs and links to important things are on my website, www.damanbamrah.com. So yeah, catch me on there. Let's be friends. Subscribe to my mailing list.
Love it. Well, Daman, thank you so much for your time for our Dead conversation today. I'm so grateful to you.
This is the best Dead conversation I've ever had. Thank you, Tanya.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside. And we'll never make it, and we'll never break it until